There we go. End of the day. So I am the last person between you and I think the closing happy hour, so I will try and keep this fast-paced and full of content. I also, Sam, who's running the AV, looked at me and said, "You've got 94 slides?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I do. We're going to go fast, so hang on." But before I do that, where's Kara? Is Kara here somewhere? Kara Wilbur, are you in the audience somewhere? Right, where are you, Kara? She's hiding. Okay, I just wanted to share with you. So in the last 60 days, I've been in like 8 cities doing presentations like this. I have never been, San Francisco, Houston, Phoenix, Denver. I have not been to a conference that had this much good content packed into a single day, all around the things that we, love and are passionate about talking about. So great job. And I'm hopeful that what I'm going to say to you is reinforcing some of the things that Allie and Chris and Monty and Henry have shared, because I think we're all working in some ways from different gateways to get to the same solution set. And I think that's really what's important, is this is not going to be solved with one single path or one single training. It's a bunch of people working in ways that they're comfortable with this. So I'm going to talk to you about, this is a shorthand that I use, and when my book came out, I was trying to explain this idea of building small, and trying to explain it in typical wonky plannerese. And somebody said, "Were you really just talking about building community instead of commodities, right?" And I said, "Yeah, that's it." So this is all about building community instead of commodity. And the way this whole started for me is I'm trained as a landscape architect, and about midway through my career, I went back to graduate school because I was frustrated that most of the stuff I was designing wasn't getting built. And so it was like, what don't I understand about the development process, the challenges that my clients have, that I need to be able to better grasp if I'm going to get the built environment shaped the way that I think it should be shaped. And so I graduated, and I was working again in another large firm, and most of the work I was doing sat in this upper, your left-hand quadrant. It was an intersection of institutional capital, working in corporate cultures, doing large-scale infill and master plan projects. And yet, while I was traveling the country and doing this work and sitting down with these clients, I'd go hang out at night at places like this, which were anything but big and institutional. And this is a developer out of Portland, Oregon, named Kevin Kavanaugh. And he has this great phrase. Those of you that know land use economics, there's this things that the appraisers and the developers and the market financial analysts say, which is highest and best use, right? What's the highest and best use for a piece of property? And Kevin asks, highest and best use for whom? So he bought this site and could have done 150 apartment units, and this was a half-acre auto repair shop. Now, how many of these do you see around the country? So how many opportunities lay out there with this? And Kevin's attitude was, yeah, I could do a bunch of apartments, or I could do this, which is 5 incubator kitchens in a neighborhood that has no third place, that has full of entrepreneurs and immigrants that want to get a foothold into the economy. And so he built this, and for him as a small developer, it was much lower risk. He could get it up and running, and for an entrepreneur coming into this, they could be up and running in 2 days with a minimal amount of money. Some of the things that like Monty was showing. The biggest thing that he was saying was, if one of these doesn't make it, and inevitably one of them won't, he can turn that around and have somebody back in there in 2 days. Imagine if he'd built a 40,000 square foot cheesecake factory and then went bankrupt during the pandemic. What would you do with that? So the resilience that Allie talked about of this approach to development is very, very important for creating communities that actually evolve organically and support the local economy. So as I was doing those other things, I started thinking, gee, maybe there's an opportunity in the built environment, and for me who loves real estate and real estate development, to work in this other quadrant, which is the intersection of small, contextual, incremental forms of development using a bootstrapped entrepreneurial approach to getting things built. Come on. So I founded this thing called the Small Scale Developer Forum, and it's very much a work in progress. So twice a year, we go to a different city. We go to 2 different cities. We tour projects, we meet with developers, we hear about the local region and what's being done to make these things happen. And it was the result of those tours, now 13 years, 23 cities, 250 projects. But halfway through that kind of arc of traveling around, I put together the book called Building Small. And the idea was to tell the story of the developers that we met, the projects they were doing, the kinds of impact they had in the communities they were working, and more than anything else, how hard we have made it for them to actually do the stuff that we want to have done. The book is written in 3 parts. It's written, first of all, what and why, kind of the journalistic, academic, what is small-scale development and why does it matter, especially now? The second is how to do small-scale development. And this was really important. Monty touched on some of this, but the idea that doing small-scale development is not what they taught me at MIT in the MRED program. This is very different. It's what they don't teach you in business school. It's nuanced, it's different, it's not what you get when you get a CCIM degree and all those kinds of things. There are nuances that you need to know, and there's certain things that you've got to bring to the table in order to do that successfully. So this is a deep dive in 10 parts of how you actually do this kind of work. And then the last one is a series of case studies. But I didn't just want to profile projects, because real estate's all about numbers and projects. I wanted to profile the people that are doing it and the agencies that are enabling this to happen. So there's a full suite of those stories that hopefully we're setting the stage for people to look at this and say, yeah, that's what we want to do, or that's what we want in our community. How do we make that happen? The other piece of it is it was written for 2 audiences. One, obviously, for the real estate entrepreneur that wanted to know how to do this and really make this their life's work. But the other audience was civic leaders, staff, and citizen activists. Because everywhere I would go and consult and show these kinds of work and talk about the potential of their communities, they'd say, yeah, that's what we want. We want that locally owned, fine-grained, small-scale businesses, that adaptive reuse of those really cool buildings. And I'd look at them and I'd say, but do you know how hard you have made it? So read this book, because you have to understand what it takes to get those things done. So real estate being a very quantitative industry, I always get questions. The book's been out 4 years now, and the number one question I always get is, what do you mean by small? So this was small. This is how we built places. Maybe a little bigger scale than some of the towns around here, but you get it. Somebody bought a lot, they built a brownstone, they built 2 next to it for their family to live in, somebody that worked for them to live in, it paid the mortgage, paid that off. Somebody did the same thing down the street, and over time, accretively, organically, that block filled in, the buildings became the street, became the block, that became the neighborhoods that we love the most. Small was missing middle housing before it was cool. This is from one of our programs at the Small Scale Forum in Savannah, 2 what they call the train duplexes, right across the street from the mansions. People lived there. That's where they worked across the street, all throughout, beautifully done, dignified, addresses the street, just simple small housing. And now small has become the way that citizen developers actually are starting to build and to heal the neighborhoods that they work in. This is a member of our program, Sam Day, an architect from Oklahoma City, who went through the IncDev boot camp program and did the same thing as my first slide. He wanted to build a place that he could live in, that his colleagues could rent affordably, and that would pay his mortgage. And so he built this, bought an empty lot in an emerging neighborhood, built this, and now the neighborhood is slowly coming back to the work that he's done and others. So somebody, I was on a call with a foundation the other day and said, well, that's pretty great, but is small scale really gonna help solve our crisis? And so I pointed to this fact. I just did a presentation in San Francisco. California, as you know, has some of the most far-reaching accessory dwelling unit, or what was the term today, backyard cottages, legislation in the country, and passed in 2017, kind of a slow arc, but in 2022, almost 1 in 5 housing units built in all of California was an ADU. So those are small projects. There's no institutional developer doing accessory dwelling units. Since this is a CNU informed audience, I can show this. I show this slide in a lot of audiences and nobody knows what I'm talking about. But this group knows the transect, right? Everybody? Yeah, okay. So one of the things that I think is really brilliant about small is it's like what I call transect agnostic. It works as well in the urban core, where most of the stuff you see, the hipster bike store, the cool independent vinyl store, the coffee shop, but it works really well in the suburban corridors, the stuff that Monty just showed. What we see around the country are those vacant, obsolete, soulless arterial strips with these outdated strip centers are just looking for somebody to recreate those. A friend of mine, Lorenzo Perez, Venue Projects in Phoenix, has done a number of these, and it's created, again, a third place and a gathering place for these banal neighborhoods that now have a heart and soul. And then for places like where we are, these rural communities, these kind of third, fourth tier cities where locals want to invest and rebuild their communities. I'm doing a lot of work right now in Appalachia, a number of programs that we're working on to create small-scale developers to actually invest in their communities because, as Monty said, nobody's coming to save them. It's got to come from within. So back to the definition, what I mean by small. First of all, small is not a product. When the book came out, I had so many friends that come up to me and say, oh, you know, Jim, I love tiny houses. Is this a book about tiny houses? I said, no, well, they're kind of in there. But no, it's about something bigger than tiny houses. It's not about size and dollar value. And again, so much of the industry is like, how many dollars is a small project? What's the threshold for square footage? And I said, it's qualitative, not quantitative. It's about the attitude and approach that you take to the projects. It's not where you wait to scale. There's some people that say, well, that's kind of quaint, but when you really want to do real estate, come talk to me when you want to work for, you know, the big name that REIT. And it's like, no, this is where I want to work, and what a number of us call is small on purpose. And the last one, and sadly, and as you've heard from a number of people already today, small is not easier than big. Most of the systems that we've set up, most of the accounting, the institutional money, all of that is really set up for projects at scale, not to support this kind of organic, crafted, community building kinds of development. But what it is a method for building enduring places. It's a broader view of return, so it's not just about the dollars and cents that you get back from the projects, but it's like, what has it done socially? Has it created jobs? I don't know how many people are familiar with Eve Picker's crowdfunding site called Small Change, but she's got a great thing on there called the Small Change Index, which is how she measures and evaluate projects that they're going to put on their crowdfunding platform. So it's a great little simple 22-point metric to look at the impact of those projects. It is about long-term hold and value creation, which Monty was talking about. All of the developers in our cohort are long-term holders because that's, again, if you put your blood, sweat, and tears into that first project, you're creating value in that neighborhood. The way you get that return is over time by staying in it and harvesting the value of place that you've created. And the last one is it's about building projects as well as neighborhoods. So a couple of sessions ago, small scale forum, I kept wondering why so many people keep coming back to this. So we have a cohort, they're limited in size, 60 at one, 80 in the fall, and we have probably about half of those have been to 10 or more. And I'm like, why do people keep coming back to these forums? And it's because it's a unique expression of real estate in this genre of small scale. But I put this thing together about what connects us. And the first one is developers with a conscience, developers that are concerned and are doing things in the community because they care. The second one is it's about incrementally experimenting. I was talking to Chris on the way over to the Lunch and Learn. We've lost the ability in our cities to experiment, and we have to be able to try some things. Some things aren't going to work, but some things are, and we need to do things differently. This is a project in Philadelphia that's on an 11 by 93-foot lot that's 7 townhomes. And that was a typical typology in the Philadelphia, and this architect and developer were trying to hack how you could get more units in what was the typical townhouse in Philadelphia. The third one is humane scale. We all talk about human scale as designers and planners, but I like to think of that as humane scale. Human scale is about proportion of building to pedestrian and all that. Humane scale is about creating places that really blur the lines between the public realm and the private realm and really engage you and invite you to come in. This is a bar in a hotel in my hometown, and I love the way that it's only 12 feet deep. And most developers would have said, well, we'll put the trash cans in there. But this developer really understood the public realm and its relationship and opened itself up to the sidewalk. So when you're driving into town, you just want to park and have a drink because it just looks like so much fun. Design forward. Another big, and Monty talked about this in his, but this is a lot of the people in our cohort are architects, and so we have a real passion for great design. We were in Philadelphia and we were meeting with a group of emerging developers, and they said, yeah, this is our first project, so we can't really afford an architect. And they said, no, you can't afford not to hire an architect, because the worst thing that could happen to the small scale movement is we turn out a bunch of really crappy projects, and then everybody's gonna say, I don't want any more of that small stuff. So small has to really focus on great design as well as solving the economics. Inviting or inciting investment, doing things that catalyze others to invest in the neighborhood. Kansas City, Vine Street Brewing, two guys bought an old abandoned public works building from the 1920s for $18,000, then sunk another $1.5 million in it, and created the first black-owned brewery in Missouri as a result of the space that they created in this emerging neighborhood. And then last one is doing, not talking. As we've looked across the landscape of all the people that are out there and all the things that are going on in this space of small-scale incremental development, we really wanted the Building Small movement to be the people in the room who are actually doing this, solving things together, sharing lessons, and more than anything else, providing moral support. So the thing I hear the most from the forums is I finally found my tribe. I'm talking to people who are going through the same pain and suffering. I know I'm not crazy. They've been there. I know I'll get out the other side. So a couple of reasons why, as a part of the definitional context, why small matters. And this is how many people in here work in like city planning, policy work? Okay, how many are electeds or planning staff? How many are developers? I got pretty good, okay. Anybody else I missed? How many consultants? You usually have a pretty good bevy of those. Okay, so why this subject, aside from a lot of things that Allie and Chris and Monty talked about that was very obvious by what they were showing, you could see that happening in communities. I want to talk a little more academically about why this is important so you can share this with your communities. And the first one is grain. Very wonkish planning term, but many of you will get it. And this idea of the granularity of communities with small scale development, you get finer grain development. Two cities. Alan Jacobs' great streets book. Everybody should have that in their library if you love this stuff. Anyways, this one here, where are we? Come on. Savannah, thank you. Where's this one? They're everywhere. I loved it. It's actually Irvine, but I love that answer. So anyways, so street plan above, same scale, built form below. Squint and look at Savannah, and you could see how over time this building could come down, a new building could go up, this vacant lot could fill in, it could change, it could evolve, it could be organic, and it would have a constantly changing, just like an ecosystem. What do you do with this? Do you tear the whole thing down and build it up again? So this idea of, as planners, as designers, as developers, the first thing you can focus on and the most impact you can have for long-term value and place is creating and focusing on fine grain. Andrew Price writes these great pieces for Strong Towns, wrote this one a while ago on coarse grain versus fine grain urbanism. I love this. What was the difference? What was the value? Diversity of ownership, smaller parcels. Lower cost of entry, smaller parcels. More destinations, one of the lead ND metrics for what makes a street walkable is having more interesting things along the way. But the one I loved the most was this one. Greater resistance to bad buildings. How many blocks have you been in downtown where there's a blank walled parking garage and it's going to be there for generations versus walking down a block and there's two not so great buildings, but one really great building? There's kind of what I call blockscape resilience, the ability of the block to absorb bad architecture, and that's much more easily done with fine grain. So this is a project, I wanted to tell this story. This is from my hometown, Healdsburg, California. And very interesting study in fine grain, small scale incremental development. So our town is centered around the plaza, perfect 1 acre town square, ranked #2 in the country by the Smithsonian as one of the best town squares. Chautauqua is #1 if you want to know, which my mother lived on, so she used to always tell me that. And so for years, the square was here, and this was vacant. The city owned this RDA property. And so the city puts out an RFP, and a developer shows up in the 90s, and he says, I'm your saver. I've got an idea. I'm going to put a Kmart there. And the city says, oh, wow. And the city was blighted. It had been declared a blight. We did a whole redevelopment area around the whole thing. City fathers, to their credit, said, we think we'll wait. We can do better than that. Fast forward 10 years later, local developer from the city, high-end restaurateur get together, and they develop what was Hotel Healdsburg. Award-winning hotel, really created that fourth wall of the living room, the town's living room, really put the town on the map. 50 keys. Most conventional developers would tell you, well, 50 keys in a hotel won't work. It's not big enough. It's not efficient, yada, yada, yada. It was so successful, the developer then came and bought an old gas station and put a 37-key hotel down at the end of the block. And then that was so successful, came in and did another 39 units in the middle of the block. And so at the end of the day, he had 120 keys, the magic number to be able to have conferences, be efficient. But he did it incrementally, so everyone has its own brand. They have different price points. If you have a conference that needs 120 rooms, you've got it. If you don't need 120 rooms, you can distribute them over different markets. And he's got what I call a back-of-house corridor that's just basically the sidewalk. If this restaurant's really busy and this one's not, they can just send some staff down. But squint in your eyes and think about if that had been a 120-key, name that, brand, limited service hotel that just raised a whole corner of the block. So the ability of that incremental approach to maintain the grain and character of the community was very successful for them as a hotel operator, but for us in terms of the pattern and character of where we live. Authenticity. There is an inherent, the stuff that Monty showed, when you've got those small entrepreneurs that are putting their heart and soul into things, that's where the magic is. That's what makes places feel real. So this is another hotel, but I love this example. This is in Charleston, South Carolina. This is an 83-key Marriott Residence Inn. Now, how many have ever seen a Marriott Residence Inn that looks like that? But what was interesting about this, and I don't know if people know, Charleston was the first city in the country to have historic preservation guidelines. And to the city's credit, they could have done what a lot of cities did, which was like, oh, you're going to build that? Make it look just like this, because this is the historic part, so it should look just like that. And no, they said, no, it's a different era, it's a new building, respect the idea, the principles of proportion and materiality and fenestration, but it's a new building. But the key in this is this, that they maintained the pattern and scale and grain of the buildings along that face, which makes it feel like it's been there a long time and feels more authentic. Now, obviously, the workhorse in this is this building back here, which is where the majority of the rooms are. So they've solved the problem of efficiency and number of rooms, but maintained the quality and identity and character of the public realm. Economy. Amani showed some great examples of that, and this is where I think small really matters. There was a conversation today, and we see this in all our group. A lot of our developers are also in business with their tenants, because the credit tenants don't typically want to go to these spaces, and the developers typically don't want the so-called, formulated businesses. So guy might be a great chef, might be a great bike operator, might not be a great businessman, so they end up going into business together. But there's a symbiotic relationship that's created by creating the small-scale real estate in support of small-scale businesses. And I think, as Ali noted earlier, there is a resilience. What we learned in 2008 is the Cheesecake Factories and the Dollar Generals and all of them mailed the keys back to the bank when things went tough. If my balance sheet is on my co-working space, I'm going to make sure that it works. So this is my co-working space. How many places have people seen like this? A really tired old 60s shopping center, former bank that had sat vacant for 15 years, and we basically redid it as a 4,500 square foot co-working space. But more than being about work, it's also was designed to be a community hub, a place where women can have their book groups, networking groups meet. We have a men's group that comes in and does Friday night movie night. So we really wanted this to be a living room for the community to gather. And then we measure the economic impact that that place has on an annual basis by polling the visitors. How much do you spend in downtown? And how much do you spend in the shopping center? Because when I go to negotiate my lease with my landlord, I want to say, hey, we've brought this much more business to your surrounding tenants. That's got to be worth something before you jack my rent up. And then the last one, kind of a tortured word right now in the culture or the environment that we're in, but this idea of equity, and both social as well as real. And the way that real estate is typically talked about is this. This is what they teach you in grad school, right? You have individual assets in individual silos, and never the twain shall meet, because if I underwrite multifamily, I sure as heck don't want retail below that building, and vice versa. And Monty touched on this, but this is the diagram that I've used since 2015 to explain what we mean by small. And the idea is small doesn't look at real estate as silos. It looks at it as an ecosystem. And it's built on 3 core pillars. The first one is a strong local economy. The next one is the authenticity of places. And the third one is providing solutions to the housing crisis. And you can see around that in orbit are a whole series of expressions of the kind of real estate that turns into. But the idea is we're building places, we're building an ecosystem, and what I do is beneficial to someone else and to someone else, and it's connecting and creating a sum that's greater than the individual parts. So towards that end, a friend of mine in Oklahoma City did this project, won a global award. Doesn't look like much, but a very good part of the city that had not been invested in 30 years, heavily redlined, took 23 banks to finally get someone to step up. They took an old shopping center, put in a medical facility, and then created a series of small spaces, much like what Monty did, and worked out a deal where as tenant, if you are there for 10 years and successfully pay your rent for 10 years, you get a slice of equity in the building. So there's a real incentive to try and stay in the business. And even if you end up subleasing it, staying on as the tenant is important. And Jonathan tells a very funny story about this is when they finally had Cricket Wireless came in and they wanted to move into one of the stalls. And so they got all the tenants, future owners together and said, oh, no, we don't want Cricket. You know, Cricket's just, that's the lower tier. We want AT&T or we want Verizon. Why can't we have one of those? So as, you know, before tenants wouldn't really care that much, right? But now they have an interest in the building and how it shows and the brands that it's carrying. And so it's a very different kind of conversation and way of managing real estate. Okay, I'm going to end. There were a couple of really great questions today, and I'm going to end on just a single case study, which is my project. And I tell this story a lot around the country because there's a lot of conversations going on about policy changes and zoning changes. And this was a project that was done without any of that. And what it was really is about is as a small-scale developer working with the community, and I think somebody asked the question for Monty about like, what does a community need to do? And I like to say it's not about policy, it's about partnership. And we need more thought partners and fewer just code administrators. And so I'll walk you through this and how we hacked through the existing archaic code without doing a lot of major changes. And I happen to have my book in the back, and if you don't even buy it, you know, I'll send you this page, because if you don't understand, this is real estate 101. Real estate is fundamentally about risks. So as a developer, I'm constantly trying to manage my risks, and as a public sector, citizen, planner, you have a responsibility to help minimize that risk for me. I tell the story, I think there's a myth, and what I call the myth of the $5 million. And a lot of public sector folks think there's an extra $5 million hidden in our pro forma, and it's up to them to pull it out. And there's never $5 million in our pro forma in these small jobs. So it's really getting to a level of trust and working through collaboratively how we do this. But one of the ways you do that is to understand the kinds of risk that we're taking and trying to manage as we move through the process. So this is the first project I ever did. This is aligns with, I loved Allie's comment today, cute as hell house. This was actually an 1876 cottage that we had renovated. It was the first project that we did. It was kind of a weekend house, 980 square feet. And we would entertain, or it was on the historic home tours a couple of times, and people would come through and say, oh my God, this is so great. Why don't people build stuff like this anymore? So, well, I don't know, maybe I could. And so then we did the next one, which was another renovation. It was 1,400 square feet, and with 2 cottages, it was actually 2 ADUs in the back. And the same thing, people were like, this is great. This is all I need. I don't need a big 2,500 square. Why don't people build something more like this? So, to Monty's analogy, I've never used this before, but I guess this is what I was doing. So this is my farm, a 500-foot radius around where I live now, the first house I just showed you, my co-working space, 2 other adaptive reuse and renovations I did. And so I had a rule that I wouldn't take on any project that I couldn't ride my bike to, because it was just a lot easier. And when you're doing this kind of work, you have to be there a lot, because you don't have, as Monty said, you can't afford a construction administrator. You can't afford somebody to manage the process. You got to be there. And there's opportunities that you want to seize in the field. Hopefully you've got a contractor who is aligned with you about doing that. So an opportunity came up to buy this site. It's 1 acre. It's actually It's actually a single-family home site with a vacant parcel next to it, totaled 1 acre with a little bit of river, on what's called literally the wrong side of the tracks. Now, this is the town I live in. It's 12,000 people. It's fairly bougie. So that was bougie, not boozy. But anyways, I had an opportunity to buy it, worked out the deal, we got it acquired. And then we sat down with the city in the get-go, and we said, there's 3 things we could do on this. Working with Dan Perolic from Opticos, we laid out 3 schemes that went from as of right, 7 units, all the way up to pretty aggressive, I think 24 units, doing some manor homes and some attached duplexes and some of the stuff that Allie showed today. And then we sat down and we looked at what would be the affordability, what would be the gauntlet we would run through in terms of approvals, and we said, what do you think you could support? And they said, as of right is kind of a shame because it's such a great site, but the one on the left is a bridge too far. We really wouldn't want to go there. The neighbors aren't going to like it. We couldn't support it. Let's try to find something in the middle. So we very early on enlisted the leadership at the public to think through, to have some authorship and psychological ownership of the project. And then we got to the public session, and we sat down with the community and we said, so we got this thing called codes, bought this site, we're going to do some housing. So this is what the codes tell us we should build. This is what the codes say we can build. We really would like to build this, but this is what's we're allowed to build, and you really can't say much about it. So what do you want to do? And they're like, oh, no, we want this. And it's like, okay, so we need to change the rules in the way that we work together going through this. And that set the table for how collaborative and creative we would be, not changing the rules, but just how we would look between the text of intent and actually black and white of the codes. So the plan that came out of that was 12 units on 1.2 acres. We did all as of right zoning. So there was no PUD, no RMP. This is 6,000 square foot lots, which is another thing. So we talked a lot about small lots. We got effectively small lots because a lot of the lots got dedicated over to reciprocal use easements for parking and green space. And then a variety of sizes, which I'll talk about. And then there's things like CEQA infill exemption, which probably doesn't mean a lot to you, but in California, it's about 2 years on $100,000 worth of effort to clear the environmental regs. Because it was an infill project and because of the way we navigated, we bypassed that. It's the first time it had been done in the city. So this is the finished product, and you can kind of see the intent. Very much about front porch living, real front porches, 10 feet deep, not little 5-foot stick-ons. Very much about the shared green space in the middle that everybody does have a private yard. We thought that while communal living is great, the people that are buying this are probably going to want some vestige of privacy. So we have a very clear hierarchy of the most public to the semi-public to the semi-private, all the way to the private on each home. And that was a really big value add for us. Again, the front porches, the thing that you'll see in this next slide is we were blessed with some amazing trees on the property. 14 heritage trees, we kept all but one. The one that we couldn't keep, we brought a portable mill on site, slabbed it, and then made that into our community table. The little bars here and the little stools here, we called it our homage to Tree 31, and everybody got a little piece of the site beforehand. And, it's those kind of stories and that back to that idea of authenticity that just close the deal for every sale. You can see, and then there were these quirky things of working around the trees and stuff, which I love when you get these places that feel like they've been there a long time as opposed to so prescribed in terms of their design. The change in fence materials, the concrete walls, the little quirk in the walkway because we had a route where it was supposed to go. All of those things I think add a lot of character and authenticity to them. And then the central community space. So, and just a couple of the key lessons that came out of this for me that I like to share. And the first one is this idea of form before lot. So even though this is a single family, detached, 6,000 square foot lot, like any other subdivision, the key to this outcome was we designed the form of the neighborhood first in 3 dimensions, and then we backed into the lotting scheme. So this will make a lot of engineers kind of cringe. It's like, the way it typically works, somebody comes to an engineer and they say, lay out the lots per code, and so you end up with the 50 by 120 or 60 by 120, and then the builder puts in the product that sold best on the last project. In this case, we designed the community form, and then you see we've got all these weird little quirky things because every garage had to be on the lot in order to sell it, and the garages were back here off of each alley. So the lots were shaped and conformed and gerrymandered to serve the form as opposed to the form being an outcome of the lotting plan. The key in this, though, was this one, Lot 117. I call it the money lot. And anybody that knows small-scale development knows that you never make any money until that last house sells. So the project made no financial sense with 7 lots. This is the one that made the money. So from a financial standpoint, this was critical. And from an urban design standpoint, it was key because it created that wall of the living room. But how do you have a lot in the middle with a garage up there that's on the lot? That's how. And I can bet 99% of public works directors and public jurisdictions would look at that and say, well, that doesn't really meet the code. I mean, that's only 4 feet wide, and how does that work and all that? But because we'd gone all the way back to the public works and the planning department and showed them the vision and had these meetings with the community about what they wanted, we were able to say, but this is how we get there. And I'm like, yeah, no, I get it. It's a little weird. I get it. But that's okay. That works. And so with that, now the other piece of this, it was another funny story about this. So I take it to Planning Commission, and you always have that one Planning Commission. It's usually just one, right? And so a woman says, well, now, I would never carry my groceries in the rain from my garage all the way back there. You got to put the garage next to the house. That'll never work. And I'm like, well, no, you understand how we're doing this? No, I would never do that. And I'm like, well, you're not the market, you know? And I'm the developer. I'm taking the risk. And I think that's one of the key things is we're taking the risk. If it's a dumb idea and it doesn't sell, that's our problem. It's not your problem. Epilogue is it sold for the most of all the units on the property. So, another thing is just this idea of fitting in, which is one of the other principles about small-scale development. So this idea of how we knitted this into the existing fabric of the existing neighborhood from a grain standpoint, the orientation of the buildings, and even the use of our ADUs as a transitional element from these homes on each side that were flanking the community so that they didn't feel like they were being overpowered by something that had been parachuted in, but there was this kind of sweet little 500 square foot studio unit, still had a front porch, still animated the street, but made a nice transition from one existing neighborhood to the new neighborhood. It's bigger than affordability. I know everybody's talking about affordability, and I realize it's a real challenge, but I don't think enough people are talking about diversity. In fact, I saw the hats out there that say legalize housing, and I see that phrase a lot, and I'm kind of like, yeah, but I feel like it's a little bit of a red meat statement. Housing is legal. Diverse housing is not, and that's what we should be talking about. So this project then, what we did is we had 3 different product types, 1,700 square foot, 1,200 square foot, 500 square foot, and then intermixed them in very intentionally so that the character and the choreography of moving through those spaces was rich, it was interesting, it was different. And as you walked through and walked past them, everybody's front porch faced each other. So the 500 square foot faced the 1,700 square foot, and there was a dignity about the dialogue from house to house, regardless of what size it was. And this was the 500 square foot ADU. Our 2 favorite subjects to end on, parking. So parking was a big issue, and I get the need to reduce parking standards, but again, as a developer, I wasn't going to take the risk in this market and do less than 2 spaces per unit because that's what this market was going to want. The key became how do we actually accomplish that, and this efficiency of creating a single lane with garages right off of that it did 2 things for us. One, it created this buffer between the adjoining developments so they didn't feel like we were backing up onto them. But it also really minimized the number of driveways. And when we went to Planning Commission, one of the commissioners said, I can't believe you got that many units and you still have that much open space. And one of his fellow commissioners said, yeah, that's what happens when you get rid of all the driveways. And it was I thought, really insightful because we had basically consolidated all the driveways. Everybody drives across somebody else's lot, so even though it's a 6,000 square foot lot, the lot is effectively smaller. We just used the requirements of the code to serve the transportation needs. But one of the issues that came up was the neighborhood felt we didn't have enough parking. It's a challenged neighborhood. ADUs in California don't require parking. And so we didn't have to do it, but we said to the city, look, if we could just get rid of all these side yard setbacks, because remember, each garage is on its own lot, and we could gang the garages together, we could take all those little 5-foot, 3-foot interstitial spaces and gang them up and create 4 additional guest parking spaces. So that was a variance that was not in the code, but we air gapped them and separated them so they are individual buildings with the same facade, made it much more efficient for us as a developer, but it also served the neighborhood's needs in parking. And then my favorite story is the one about the fire department. So fire department, as you know, can always be a bit challenging with these kinds of development. And so I met with them very early on, sketched it out, and they said, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. I was like, well, you know, we got these homes in the back. And like, yeah, no, the rule is 150-foot backing length, 150-foot hose length. So yeah, you're good. So anyways, we go through design, we go through design approvals, we go through engineering, we submit improvement plans, and the fire department comes back and says, you can't do that. It needs a cul-de-sac at the end. I was like, well, no, we already had this conversation. I don't remember that. You have a 220-foot fire lane. I'm like, no, we talked about this, 150-foot backing. Like, no, 220-foot fire lane. So we argued for an hour, and then finally I said, well, what if we had a 150-foot fire lane and a 70-foot driveway? I said, oh yeah, no, that works. So a lot of times it's just about semantics and giving them the cover they need from a code standpoint to me, because it really was 150 feet to back the truck here, 150 feet to drag the hose there. Made it work. And then the last one is, again, back to the title, building community, and this idea of, we talk a lot about this as designers and planners and social engineers, that can you create community? And I'll have to say it really, really worked. We had everybody that bought here was not from here, and within a very short period of time, they were doing dinners together, they were hanging out in the center, in the green, they were sharing wine. Somebody said, oh, I'm making ribs, I got a bunch of extras, anybody want to bring a salad? So it really did connect people. Part of that was because it became a self-selecting audience, because the buyers, it was very evident what the intent was. So we had people that came to buy, and they would almost universally say, I love this project. This is so beautiful. And then they would say one of two things. I love the idea of knowing my neighbor, and I'm not around him much. I could give them my keys. And if I'm sitting on my porch, they're going to stop by and have a cocktail. How wonderful would that be? Or they said, I love this place, but I don't like the idea of sitting on my porch and having somebody come by and want to have a cocktail with me. So that group did not buy, and the other group did buy, so they were naturally predisposed to connecting with one another. So just some of the views, important. We really spent a lot of time on the vignettes from where the houses were sited, where the windows went. So one of my favorite quotes from Witold Verbinski, just about that, to me, captures the essence of what we're talking about. This idea that successful places we love, are created, intricately, slowly, over time by individuals, one project at a time. So, if you like that, like those ideas, a couple of things. I said the book, it's had a really great run. Just got some stats back from the publisher. I was actually pretty surprised to see some of those rankings. It's great for your civic leaders. It's great for planning commission. It's also great for architecture grads. A lot of schools are using it for their textbooks. The Small Scale Developer Forum, the next one is next week, actually, sold out. But since you heard from so many people, smart people from Fayetteville, we'll actually be in Fayetteville October 5 through 7. If you want to attend, it's a great group. It's limited to 80 people. It's a 3-day deep dive into projects in the region and policies and all those kinds of things, and just a super fun group. And then the other one is an online social network that I've built. If anybody knows Mighty Networks, it's like a private LinkedIn for small-scale developers. There's case studies, chat, all those kinds of things. You can join for free. We've got about 1,200 people up on there just exchanging information and adding to it. So it's kind of a go-to if you're in the small-scale space or interested in this just as a passion. And that, with 1 minute left, I made it, Sam.
Any questions? Does anyone have a question for Jim? Oh, hold on.
I didn't wear them out. It's good.
Thanks so much. I serve on the planning board, and there's a number of planning board residents here from the city of Lewiston. We're working on PUDs, and I think your most recent, the last version of that, it's a really good example of, I think, what we picture when we're picturing some of what we're hoping to do with these ordinance changes. One of the big questions is we're trying to incentivize increased ownership, actual owner occupancy investment in our communities, particularly smaller infill lots. And I'm wondering how you dealt with the ownership construct of lots and common space and how that related as a developer to financing. One of the things I often find myself saying on that board, as some of our board members who might not be here today, for example, are hearing from a developer, is they'll be I would never drag my groceries that far. And the reality is the developer is taking on that risk, exactly what you said, which is something we try to get across. And I think that's true, particularly as we're considering these PUDs. And so I'd love to hear kind of the ownership piece and how the common space kind of related into that.
Yeah, so first caveat, this is in California, which everything is like 4 times as complicated and expensive. But it's basically the green is a separate parcel that's dedicated to an HOA or homeowners association that was set up. It's what they call it, common interest development under the real estate code. One of the lessons learned with 8 units, it's really hard to make the math work on the HOA dues. And so, if I could have done more units, it would have been great. I mean, the basic math, it's $300 a month, $100 is reserve, $100 is maintenance, and $100 goes just to managing the HOA. So it's not a very efficient use of money. But the other thing in this case, we did more or less a horizontal HOA and not the buildings at all, because the defect liability laws in California are so onerous. We really were trying to isolate as developer, trying to isolate ourselves from that. And then, I think the green paid for itself in spades in terms of the value creation. People love that idea. Having the private space was very important, though. There's another one that was done that did not create those private yards, and I think they had a hard time selling. The other big value add on this was the ADUs. They were huge. Now, even though I showed them as a unit, they're what I call a policy unit, but they're not a revenue unit because they sell with the houses. But we consistently got a significant premium, and we sold cottages with ADUs and cottages without ADUs, houses with ADUs. So we had a really good control set, consistently sold with the ADUs. And it was for some of the reasons you would normally think, I've got kids, I got in-laws, I want rental income, I want a home office. But the one that we heard the most that I never thought about is one of my partner's health is failing, and the ability to have a caretaker live there as part of their package, but not be in our house, is really a great kind of long-term bet. The other thing that our market analyst said about it, which was, he said, if you're a 2,200 square foot house in the suburb, I wouldn't attribute a lot of value to that. But because you're a 2-bedroom, 1,700 or 1,200 square foot house, you've just made a 2-2, a 3-3, but with great optionality. And so it's a significant value like that. So again, to the stuff that Ali showed, the ability to create that optionality with different scales was really, really valuable.
We're going to have... Thank you, Jim.
Yeah,
appreciate
thank you.
that. We're going to have Christina Cannon.